All right, everybody. We're here with week 14 of Now Showing with Mike and Wayne. This is an honor for this episode. We have our very first guest, Freddy Krueger fanatic Scott Jordan. Scott, thank you for joining us.
Hello. It's a pleasure. And I'm also joined by my 4-year-old daughter, Lily, who was a Freddy fanatic until we went to Walgreens a couple weeks ago, and I pushed the button on the Freddy doll, and he started yelling and dancing, and then she didn't like it.
I could understand that. That could be... Wayne would probably be just as terrified.
I'm nervous just talking about this right now.
So this
as a true coward that I am very happy that Scott is here to ride shotgun with you, Mike.
My wife says she's only... we can say that. My wife says she's only a Freddy fan when it involves sex.
Interesting. All right, then.
Outstanding, I think.
Yeah.
I think. You're probably still disturbed by it. Wait, it's okay.
The coach background.
We're going to start this week talking about one of the premier slasher film franchises, and that is Nightmare on Elm Street. It started in 1984, directed by Wes Craven, and became just a massive hit and spawned several sequels, which we'll eventually get into, but we're going to start talking about the first movie. So people that aren't familiar with Nightmare on Elm Street, it's about a man named Fred Krueger, who is a child murderer, who gets murdered by a bunch of parents, and then comes and visits their children in his dreams. That's the...
I have a question. Now, was he actually murdered in the boiler room by these parents, or is that just an addition in the new movies? Or
That was touched on in both, I believe, the first, when Nancy's mom was kind of explaining what happened.
Yes.
Vaguely said, they tracked him down and set fire to him, and then it was touched on again in Freddy's Nightmare, and then it was touched on again throughout the franchise. But the way that the remake set it up was that he was murdered in the boiler room, or trying to escape the boiler room, however you want to put it. The remake, I don't think, follows canon the way it should be followed. But
no. Well, the remake, and we'll touch very minimally on the remake, but the remake tried to add the whole pedophile storyline, which they originally were going to put in the original movie, and it really, it makes you realize why they removed it from the original movie, because it takes away the fun of the character.
Yeah.
It's one to have a child murderer, it's another to have a pedophile who you're kind of laughing with and going along with, and it really they went for a more darker route, I think, but still tried to keep a lot of the same Freddy Krueger elements that made him a fun character. So you're kind of you're betting against yourself when you do that kind of stuff.
Right, and they paid for that.
Yes, exactly, mightily. And I love Jackie Earle Haley, but they totally missed the mark on that movie. We'll get to, like I said, we'll touch briefly on that towards the end before we get to our review of the week. But so the first movie, when it came out, I was like 1. So I was, obviously I didn't see it until much later. But it's definitely one of those movies that, on repeat viewings, has become one of my top 5 movies of all time, of horror films of all time. Robert Englund is fantastic as Freddy Krueger in the original movie. It's got that edge of comedy to it, but it's not, we'll get into the other sequels where they go too far with the comedy. This one didn't do that. It kept it scary. The effects were great. The practical effects they did in this first movie were fantastic. It introduced the world to Johnny Depp, which I think at the time was big because he hadn't really blown up yet. And it just was a lot of fun. So, Scott, what was your first memory of seeing Nightmare on Elm Street?
I was 6 when it came out. I literally had to beg my dad to take me to see it. I was one of those kids that stayed up late for HBO and watched horror movies and didn't get scared of them. Other things scared me, but crazily enough, the boogeyman didn't. So I begged my dad to take me to see it, and my parents thought that I would be scared out of my mind. And I saw the movie, and as a child, I remember it was scary as hell. I thought
we had trick-or-treat candy.
Yes, we had trick-or-treat candy.
Trick-or-treat candy just seems to make everything better.
Yes.
If you're scared, a Reese's or a little mini Snickers, there it is.
I remember being scared as hell of it, honestly. The part where Glenn was,
And Horsey kisses too.
where Glenn was sucked through the bed and then, regurgitated back out.
Yeah.
It gave me nightmares. I didn't realize at the time how big of an impact that Freddy Krueger would have, on my childhood. But I remember seeing it at a young age. The first horror movie I ever watched in the movie theater, and I was just I was scared of Freddy, but I loved the movies. I loved that feeling of being scared. And I don't know if you guys know the story behind Wes Craven writing that movie was based on things that he read about in another country about men falling asleep, complaining of nightmares, and then eventually we have kids as well. Men falling asleep, middle-aged, healthy men, and they would complain of nightmares, and then some of them would not wake up. And then he combined that with a story that he tells in some of the interviews. And one thing I want to reference is a Nightmare on Elm Street fan. If you've never seen Never Sleep Again, the Elm Street Legacy, you have to watch it. It's 7 hours of unbelievable story.
I've seen parts of it. Yeah, it's long, but it's really good.
It's incredible. But he told a story about how he was at his home and looked out his window, and there was a man walking on the sidewalk, and he had a hat on, like a fedora hat, like Freddy did. And he said the man saw him looking out the window, so he hid, and then he would peek back out and look out the window, and the man literally just stopped and stared through the window at Wes as a kid and just stared at him for 5 good minutes, wouldn't move, and started walking up to the house. And then he said that just gave him nightmares. So he took both of those stories and made them into what became Freddy Krueger.
Yeah, it's crazy to take your own life experiences and create a character like Freddy. I mean, because it seems so unbelievable, but the fact that some of it comes from reality, I think has been really cool with this character. And then you mentioned the Glenn scene. That is probably the most memorable death scene from the original movie. The opening scene as well with, I forget the character's name, where she's on the wall, though. They're dragging her up the wall and stuff like that was really cool, too. But the Glenn scene when he's trying not to fall asleep, and, oh, God. If you hate gore, don't watch this movie, because that's definitely evident in this first one. It's just bloody as hell throughout the entire thing.
It cut off shirts for men a cool time.
The half shirts?
Yes.
That's right. Every time I watch that movie, I'm like, oh yeah, those were a thing for a while.
Yeah.
And the feathery hair as well for Johnny.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, so this first movie, it was different too, because at that time you had, Halloween kind of started the trend in '78. And then you had Friday the 13th, you had The Burning, you had a bunch of slasher films that just kept coming and coming. But they were very similar. It was always about one unstoppable killer who couldn't, you had to burn him or cut his head off, or it was just a regular slasher, which I love the regular slasher movies. As we've talked before, Halloween's my favorite horror movie of all time. But Nightmare on Elm Street did something different, and I think that's why it stands out, and it still stands the test of time, because when everything was the same back in the 80s, it dared to be different, and it kind of opened up this different world. And then you get other movies that start doing. Wayne and I talked about Slumber Party Massacre 2 a couple weeks ago when I watched it recently. That's basically a Nightmare on Elm Street ripoff, which was a sequel to a movie that was a Halloween ripoff. So they it kind of ingrained its way into society to where you start having ripoffs of even that type of a slasher film.
Yeah, for me, when you compare the originals of the big slasher movies, Halloween and Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th, obviously with the original Friday the 13th, Jason Voorhees was just the
kid.
Narrative in the movie, wasn't actually the killer. And Halloween at that point not yet added the supernatural element into Michael Myers. Mm-hmm. For me, I think Nightmare on Elm Street stands out because it added the supernatural element. You had no defense against Freddy Krueger. You could run Michael Myers, run from Freddy Krueger in dreams. He's always going to catch you. For me, that took it up a notch. So obviously, I'm very biased in here, but I think and I love the original Halloween. One of my top 5 favorite horror movies of all time, mm-hmm. But no defense against Freddy Krueger for most of these kid movies until it's really started kind of getting out of hand about how can we kill him, how can we, mm-hmm. For the most part, I just thought that adding that supernatural element was great.
All right, so the first one was a hit. Everybody loved it. So then when you make a hit movie like that, especially in the 80s, and it's a horror film, you got to have a sequel. And as far as sequels go, we all, Wayne may not be as familiar with it because I know you don't watch these movies as much. Have you seen Nightmare on Elm Street 2, Wayne?
That's a big no can do, sir.
Okay. So, Nightmare on Elm Street 2, we're going to talk just a little bit about it, because, Scott, so you were a big fan of the first one. So when the second one came out, how high was your enthusiastic level for this sequel?
Just through the roof. I had another year under my belt, so I was a little older, a little wiser, a little manlier, 7 years old. So yeah, I was adept to what sequels were at that point, because, young kid, you don't really get a whole lot of sequels that mean as much to you. But yeah, Nightmare 2, man, when that came out as Freddy's Revenge, I thought this is gonna be and boy did I miss on that one.
Everyone missed. And that was, so we won't really go into how awful the movie is, because it's not good. Jack Shoulder directed it. He's gone on and done some good horror films and stuff. But this movie did set up some things, and I think it's important to talk about, because it's now recognized as a top movie in queer horror, which I think is kind of where it's like fine, because then Freddy fans are like, fine, you could have that movie because it's terrible as a Freddy movie, but if you could find other elements to it that make it stand out, that's great. And it's because you have the final girl, but then this one you have the final boy, which is another kind of wrinkle into the whole horror genre. And then where there's so many homosexual innuendos throughout this entire movie that you would be remiss if you don't recognize it when you're watching it. And maybe as obviously as young kids in the 80s, it probably didn't shine through as much. But if you watch that movie today, it really shines through. They did a documentary on it, which I thought was really well done, about Mark Patton and kind of what he went through and how it ruined his career essentially. But yeah, it's just interesting how one movie can kind of be forgotten, I think, in the 80s, and then have this kind of whole rebirth, I think, later in its lifespan.
And I will say, I do enjoy it a little bit more now, because I can watch it for what it is. Mm-hmm. But at the time, it was a movie that was rushed into production.
Yep.
When the first Nightmare came, New Line Cinema startup company, and Nightmare made a crap ton of money for kind of put them on the map, so they wanted to rush a sequel. Wes Craven wanted to do a sequel. Mm-hmm. From David Chaskin that nobody seemed to know that was in the production other than the actors. Robert Englund has been very vocal about it, but no one seemed to know at the time that, hey, we're making a gay Freddy movie. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Even David Chaskin has gone on to say he didn't realize what it was doing. If you watch the documentary, he reverses course a little bit, because it's because he now agrees with it, because that's how he gets recognized and that's how he gets interviews. It's because people want to talk to him about the gay subtext in the film, and I think it's just an interesting way to look at this movie, and the fact that even Jack Shoulder is on record as saying that he noticed it as well. He just didn't realize it was as much as it came out to be. And the fact that they would, obviously they have the dancing scene where, very sexually dancing around the room, which is a very interesting scene. Again, in a Freddy Krueger movie, it's just a little bit weird at the time that it came out. But now it kind of makes a little bit more sense, I think. And again, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this movie. So, Wayne, do you have a question? Looks like you want.
Yeah, I want to just jump in. It seems like in every horror movie franchise, there's always that one movie you get that just either goes out into left field and completely deviates from the storyline and the plot. I know Halloween had a movie where Michael Myers isn't in it at all. It's like, Jason and Friday the 13th. There's some.
The first one, really.
Yeah.
Jason Manhattan as well.
Yeah, Takes Manhattan. Yeah, that one. Yeah. Well, the first one's still a good movie. It's just I always put Friday the 13th third, because Jason's not in the first movie, and that's what I like about Friday the 13th, is I like Jason. Right. But when it comes, and you say Halloween, the interesting parallel between Halloween 3 and Nightmare on Elm Street 2 is that both Nightmare on Elm Street 2 and Halloween 3 have become cult classics in the time that they have come out. When they came out, people were pissed off. Since then, they've kind of garnered a lot of attention and been more talked about. Special edition DVDs, special edition Blu-rays. Their stars are going out to all the horror cons and stuff and being asked to sign autographs and stuff. So some of these things were ahead of their time. Like the Halloween 3, I think Halloween 3 is a good movie. Now, I hadn't seen it till probably 25 years after it came out. I just saw it probably within the last 10 years. But it's a good movie. It's just not a Halloween movie. That's what it comes down to. Is you want Michael Myers, you're going to be disappointed. So
that's just something I wanted to touch on.
Yeah, no, for sure. So we're going to move on to number 3. And number 3 is probably, Scott, would you say either the best or second best sequel of the franchise?
I say it's the best, absolutely the best.
I'll let you talk a little more on this because it's been a while since I've seen this one. So it's directed by Chuck Russell. Screenplay, Wes Craven is credited this time, along with Frank Darabont, Chuck Russell, and Bruce Wagner. Chuck Russell did the Blob remake, which I'm a huge fan of. So he's a director, at least I respect. They bring back Heather Langenkamp. They bring in Patricia Arquette, Larry Fishburne, before he went by Lawrence. Obviously, Robert Englund is back. All right, Scott, so you go ahead with the plot synopsis for this one.
So for this one, this was basically New Line's way of trying to fix what they did with Part 2, which is why Wes Craven came back to write and at least write this story to bring the Nancy back and her dad back. It basically is almost after effects of Freddy. Now you've got the last remaining survivors of the Elm Street children that are all in this, Weston Hills Psychiatric Institute. And they're all dreaming about Freddy. Freddy's trying to systematically eliminate each one of them. So, they have this terrible character, which is the woman psychiatrist. I can't remember her name at all, but she wants to just plug them with Hypnosil and eliminate their dreams altogether, which is going to cause major ramifications. So Nancy comes back to save the day. Nancy now has gone on to get a degree in dream analysis, dream psychosis, and comes back to save the day and face Freddy Krueger one last time. But I think this movie was just hands down the best in the series. I think it got better from this. I would say New Nightmare was closest to it.
Yeah.
But that stretch from that. But then again, the 3 best movies in this series are all from Wes Craven, all written by Wes Craven.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to be a brain surgeon to understand where the charm in this series came from. But this was my favorite. The way that they really started. This is where they started plugging away on how Freddy can take kids' weaknesses and turn them into how they die. Mm-hmm. And one of the scenes is that the puppet death. The kid loves marionettes and builds. Then Freddy turns him into one. I thought that was incredible.
Well, and you could see, too, sorry, I cut you off there. You could see later in the franchise when you come to something like Freddy vs. Jason, where they take a lot of elements from this movie and put that in that movie just in the future. So you could see they were trying to stick with that.
Funny you bring up Freddy vs. Jason. I have actually seen this one multiple times. In 2003, I was working as a big brother, and one of my little brothers loved horror movies, and much in the same way Scott described his passion for horror movies at a young age. So I'm like, all right, I'll go. I was kind of having anxiety, freaking out about it. And it actually turned, I joke about it, it was one of the best comedies of 2003. It really wasn't scary in the fact that, with the mind messing with, or whatever you want to call it, it just, it had some jump out stuff that bothered me. But overall, I was like, okay. And how much of a disappointment, or maybe not a disappointment to you guys, was this movie to finally see 2 epic baddies clash?
I was not disappointed. I thought it was a fun movie. It definitely is not, maybe it's not what we expected, but at that time in the early 2000s of horror, it was pretty bad. So to get something that was at least fun and to enjoy myself a lot in the theater, which I did a lot. Me and my buddy went and saw it. I think probably, Scott, I would say maybe Freddy fans weren't as pumped because Freddy kind of takes a backseat towards the end of the movie.
I think I'm very disappointed in the kill for this movie. You take these 2 incredible icons in horror, and I know we're jumping past 4 and 5 as well, but
we'll go back and touch on them.
that have racked on-screen deaths, and you literally only kill 4 people. I was very disappointed in that, but I thought it was a fun movie. Ronnie Yu is a great established director.
Yeah.
And I think great job. I thought it was action comedy, to be honest with you. Almost a buddy comedy, but there were elements of horror in it. I think it was enough for everybody to be satisfied, but I do think Freddy took a bit of a back seat. However, Robert Englund stole every scene he did. So,
yes, he did. Yes. There is also the question that Kane Hodder was pretty upset he didn't get asked to come back for that one, especially because he was told he was going to be in it, and then found out that they were filming it and he wasn't in it. So
Yeah, he was very adamant about that, and I understand that. He played Jason, but wanted a different take. They wanted someone to deliver emotion, wanted somebody bigger than Kane Hodder, who's he's like 6'7", 6'8" in himself. So I thought the actor that played Jason did a great job. But as a fan, it would have been nice to see Kane Hodder in there.
Yeah, no, for sure. All right, so we're gonna seg out of Freddy vs. Jason talk, which we were gonna wait till later. But thanks, Wayne, for getting to it now. We're going to seg out of that and go into Nightmare on Elm Street Part 4, which is called Dream Master, I believe.
Yep.
And it was directed by hack director Rennie Harlan, who, to action movie fans, we all know him for some decent movies like Long Kiss Goodnight and Cliffhanger, but then he also did Cutthroat Island and some really bad movies in the 2000s. And this was an early one in his career. It does pick up right where they left off, right, Scott?
Yep. Yeah, and we are introduced to a new Kristen Parker as Patricia Arquette did not return for Part 4. Her star began to rise after Nightmare on Elm Street and wanted to do it, but she wanted her agent asked for a little too much money. I think the budget on this was like $6.5 million. I think she wanted some north of 10% of that or something.
Okay.
So we're introduced to Tuesday Night as the new Kristen Parker, and then you bring back Kincaid and Joey from the first movie or third movie, and then you're introduced to Alice, who becomes the new heroine in Part 4 and Part 5. So I actually liked Part 4. I thought visually it was probably my favorite movie in the way the scenes are set up. There are certain things about it I didn't like. Some of the death scenes I thought were a little too campy. It's when we started the real humorous side of Freddy into this. Freddy became more of a pop culture icon than a horror movie character. You blend those two. I still thought it was a fun movie. Did at the point start getting away from the scare factor and going to give Freddy these cool little one-line quips. I thought that I did a good job as Kristen Parker. I know that probably wasn't an easy task to step in, and she did contribute the soundtrack as well. And I thought, overall, I thought it had a wide span of characters in the movie. Rick's death scene I didn't like. Killed by the invisible Freddy in the karate dojo and the flying glove. There
definitely is a series went on. Some of the deaths got cheesier for sure. Yeah, this one, I haven't seen this one as much as some of the other ones, but I know it sits somewhere in the middle of the Nightmare movies.
Yeah, I liked it. I'd say after 1 and 3, as far as the sequels go, I think this is probably up there, probably third.
Okay, so not counting New Nightmare?
Not count. I don't count that as a sequel. I count it kind of a standalone Freddy movie.
Yes.
If you put New Nightmare in there, that's definitely top 3. But right above Freddy versus Jason.
Okay.
And because it had returning characters in it, which is something I want to see in horror movies. I want to see the characters that survived the last one. I want to see them come back and get their comeuppance again from.
I totally agree with that. That's always a lot of fun.
That scene with Kincaid in the junkyard, I thought that was great. I loved when Freddy actually used his glove kill. I thought he had this amazing tool that he used when he was alive, and then you hardly ever see him use it when he's in the dream world. So the fact that he just stabs Kincaid right in the gut, and I thought that was great. It was a great opening scene.
All right, so then we move on to Dream Child. I think I've seen this one like twice, Scott, so I'll let you talk about this one.
Dream Child, again, tells the story of Alice Thompson and Dan, who, after the fourth movie, they now are together. She's pregnant with Dan's child. Now she has all the dream powers got from Kristen, and now Freddy can't get to her because she's too strong, so he starts invading the dreams of her unborn child in her womb. So this is where I really start having a problem with the franchise. It's one of my least favorites. Honestly, I like this one slightly more than Freddy's Dead. I can watch this one now and enjoy Freddy's Dead, but it was too hokey, man. It was just way too much. Freddy back to being MC, stand-up comedy host.
Yeah.
The occasional kill. I think the kill count here was maybe 3 or 4. I did like Dan's death on the motorcycle. I thought that was cool. I did like that Alice survived again at the end of the movie. I thought they were going to build up to something else. Alice, again, But I overall I didn't like it. I'm sorry, the unborn child thing, invading the dreams. Freddy's half there and half not.
I think at this point is when they started to kind of lose their sight of what this franchise was supposed to be about. And as you see in most horror franchises, when you get to 5, 6, 7, 8, like they're really just grasping for straws. It takes what we've had recently, I think, with the new Halloween movies and the new Child's Play movies, not the remake, but the Curse of Chucky and Cult of Chucky.
Right.
It's nice to see them go back to the well and kind of try to get back to what the series used to be. So I would be interested. We'll get to Freddy's Dead in a moment because I know you got some thoughts on that one. I would be interested though to see them do Nightmare, either where it's it's Nightmare 1 and then they skip 2 and 3 and maybe 4 and then they make a sequel to 4 that actually is good. You know what I mean? Kind of to go back like they did with Halloween and see if they could. I don't know about fix it's the right word, but I know we're running out of time with Robert Englund too. I mean, he's getting older, so a lot of these things aren't going to really happen, I don't think. But just kind of a wish I think I have that, like, if they could finally go back and maybe fix this franchise a little bit, because the first movie is so good.
I think we're closer now than ever to that happening. Robert Englund has been adamant that he would not play Freddy again because he's too old. He did. I don't know if you watched the episode of The Goldbergs where he appeared as Freddy Krueger, but
I heard about it. I haven't watched it. I heard about it though. Yeah.
But he is now on board to playing Freddy one more time, and I know that the rights are back to Wes Craven's family.
Yep.
New Line. So they've been hearing pitches, and Elijah Wood, the actor, he's one of the ones behind bringing Freddy back. Get up Freddy with Robert and make it something that brings back and ties in the franchise.
Yes. Well, and with Elijah Wood and his company, Spectre Vision, like they've made some of the most original and creative horror films in the last 5-6 years. So if he could get behind it, I'd feel pretty good about it. If they got someone like a Jordan Peele who did with the Candyman franchise, with Nia DaCosta's Candyman, something like that, I would get behind as well. So I think it's probably headed in the right direction, but we'll just have to wait and see what happens. All right, so Freddy's Dead, Scott. Tell us about your hatred for this movie real quick before we get to our review of the week.
I made the decision to, end the Nightmare movies. They started branching out into, more mainstream fare and wanted to put Freddy Krueger in the rearview mirror, at least for the time being. So they made this decision and this announcement that we're going to do one more Nightmare movie, and it's going to be the end of the series. So obviously fan excitement, and this before, internet. So, we'll be Fangoria magazine update. This, and when you go to Fangoria magazine and you say they're going to make a new Freddy movie, you're like, oh my god, this is going to be incredible. So let me tell you first, before I get to what we could have. All right, Peter Jackson wrote a screenplay for this movie before he was famous for making the Hobbit movies. It sort of opened the door for him in New Line, but his screenplay involved a world where Freddy Krueger was no longer scary, and these kids would put themselves to sleep to go into the world and beat him up and bully him, and then he gets one just by happenstance, kills one by accident, defend himself, and then that starts this spiral where he's now starting to get his powers back and goes and takes revenge on all the kids in Springfield. Which the script is available online to read. Mm-hmm. It's a great script. So that was one that we could have had. Number two that we could have had, which was the one originally greenlit, brought back the Dream Warriors. It brought back Kincaid, Joey, and Taryn from Nightmare 3 as what was called the Dream Police. Basically, in this world, they stayed in the dream world to help, guide souls in their dreams in case Freddy ever came back. So it brings back those three. Alice dies early in the movie, and then it's up to her son Jacob to kill Freddy. And with the help of Bill, Taryn, and Joey in the dream world, this happens. That script is also available online. It was a great script. And then a woman by the name of Rachel Talalay, who would go on to direct this movie, who had never directed a movie before. Now, granted, she has redeemed herself by directing some episodes of Doctor Who and some other television stuff, but, I've been very adamant about my hatred to what she did in this franchise. She worked on just about every Nightmare movie, since I believe Nightmare 2 or 3, where she got herself moved up from a line producer to associate producer. She doesn't like this screenplay, so she pitches a story where Freddy has killed all the kids in Springwood, and now he needs to, get more. So he has a child, an unknown child, all this stuff. takes that to New Line Cinema, and Michael DeLuca, who was running New Line Motion Pictures at the time, says, you know what, I'm going to write this. I'm going to do this. And they give Freddy's Dead, which in my opinion is the worst movie in the franchise, worse than Nightmare 2. It's awful, man. I can't even watch it anymore. The kill scene is terrible. I don't know how they got Yaphet Kotto to be in the movie. But
Money.
I couldn't stand it. I've been very adamant about that, and I've actually taken some shots.
Yeah, I know you're telling us about that.
Yeah, about that. It's set up to be this ultimate movie that have done so much by bringing back old characters to fight Freddy. And instead, we get John Doe and Catherine Kruger, his long lost child, and 3D and Dream Demons, and it's Robert.
This is how big they thought this movie was going to be. Cameo appearances from Johnny Depp, Roseanne Barr, Tom Arnold, Alice Cooper, and then Iggy Pop sings the title song. So they
I was just looking at the cast and these people are in this movie? What the hell?
Johnny Depp is like a game show host or something, right, on the TV, something along those lines?
No, he in with one of those This Is Your Brain on Drugs announcements. Stoner, a very young Breckin Meyer, who's gone on to do some great movies. He is staring at a blank TV, and Johnny Depp pops up with "This Is Your Brain on Drugs," and then Breckin Meyer gets sucked into the TV and dies. Freddy playing the Power Glove.
Yes, I remember that. This one I actually probably watched. Oh man, maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, and I don't think I finished it. I've seen it before, but I don't think I finished it on a rewatch because I was like. I don't know. It was pretty bad.
And the fact they literally had this great script where they brought back characters, and Jacob Johnson is now the main character. Alice dies in the beginning. I know somebody thought they could do better, and they didn't.
Following this movie, Wes Craven decides that he wants to kind of come back and kind of make it his own again. And they have this new idea, and they do Wes Craven's New Nightmare, which is a meta movie before meta was a thing. You have the cast return, and they're making another like Freddy movie with everybody, and then it turns into a Freddy movie like in the movie as it's happening. I saw this movie probably when it came to like TV back in the early 90s, and I really loved it. I thought it was very original, very creative. It was definitely nice to have Wes back. It's obviously a precursor to Scream. I think that was evident here when the script for Scream came along. I think he was like, oh, well, this is kind of like what I did with, because I came from Kevin Williamson. He's like, oh, this is what I did for that. So it really just kind of sets itself apart. Like you said, it's not really part of the franchise. It kind of just fits in there at the end of the franchise as like a nice little like button on it.
I think this was to redeem Freddy's Dead, honestly. And I thought it was a great movie. I thought what Wes Craven did with it, having it be, this demon that's been around for hundreds of years take the form of Freddy because, people feared Freddy.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, regarding, 5 and 6 in the franchise here. But I thought it was great. I thought it was well done. I thought, Heather Langenkamp being in the movie, Jackson being in the movie, and then the tie-in at the end where she's actually now back in.
Yeah.
But as Nancy, I thought that was just I thought the movie was completely brilliant, and I love it. And if we are counting this as part of, canon and, Nightmare movie, this is definitely up there at the top with the favorite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This one really, like you said, though, it's a different movie, but it's just that good. Like it's, if you're one of those people that you've watched Nightmare on Elm Street and you've seen the second one and you hated it and you didn't watch any of the other sequels, at least watch New Nightmare because it's so different. It's so original. Craven still at his best, I'd say, in the early 90s and to the late 90s as well, obviously, in my opinion. Yeah, it's just a fantastic movie. We already talked about Freddy versus Jason. Yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street, if you haven't seen this franchise and you aren't sure about it, I think you should definitely check it out. At least the first one. Scott would say, 1, 3, 4, New Nightmare probably.
Yeah, I'd say 1, 3, New Nightmare, 4, Freddy versus Jason. Then
yeah, for sure.
2, 5, and Freddy's Dead. That's the order that I put him in. The remake, fall somewhere. I didn't hate the remake. I was disappointed.
Yes, it's very disappointing. It took me like 3 years to watch it. I watched the first 40 minutes when I rented it, I think, when Blockbuster was still a thing. And I then ended up, when Blockbuster went out of business, I bought it for like $1, I think. And I finished watching it finally, and I was still disappointed even after waiting all those years. It wasn't very good. I love Jackie Earle Haley. I wish they would have given him the right script to make a good movie.
Ultimately, again, the kill count was incredibly low. I think it was at 3. I didn't hate it, but I was disappointed.
Yeah, could have been a lot more. All right, everybody, we'd like to thank our first guest, Scott Jordan, for being on the show this week. It's been a lot of fun. Scott, where can everybody find you?
You can find me on Monster Jam on NBCSN. We got some new episodes coming up, so check your local listings. But NBCSN is the network. Appreciate you guys having me on.
All right, Scott, thanks again. We appreciate you being on.
All right,
Thank you, sir. It's great to catch up with you, man.
You guys take care.
All right, talk to you later.
Take it easy.
Bye.
Bye. All right, so Wayne, you're going to come back to the show here now as we do.
Thank you. Welcome back.
As we do our review of the week. This week we review Enola Holmes, directed by Harry Bradbeer, written by Jack Thorne, starring Millie Bobby Brown, Sam Claflin, Henry Cavill, and Helena Bonham Carter. This movie starts out with, we meet Enola Holmes. There's a lot of fourth wall breaking, a la Deadpool, which I found cute and adorable.
I also got flashes of Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
Oh, of course, because it is very much like a lighthearted film, and it's a fun movie, I would say, just right off the bat. So it starts off, we meet Enola Holmes, who is the sister of Sherlock and Mycroft Holmes. Obviously, everybody knows Sherlock. If you read the books, you should know who Mycroft is. He's a character in the books. I don't read the books, so he's kind of a new character to me. Their mother...
He was a very, very dislikable character, and Sam Claflin did a really good job making this guy just really unlikable. He's not a bad guy, but just a pompous twat, if you know what I mean.
Yes,
right?
you don't...
I almost feel like we should be putting a little English on this one.
He is not likable at all. And even I watched it with my father, who's in town, and he was like, this. He's like, this guy's a twerp, and I'm like, he's kind of a prick. But so it starts off with Helena Bonham Carter, who's their mother, and she goes missing, and so Sherlock and Mycroft return home to kind of settle things, make sure Enola has care, because she's only like 16 years old. They haven't seen her like since she was a kid. So she really doesn't know them. She follows Sherlock in the newspapers and stuff because he's a famous detective. She knows Mycroft is kind of a dick. He comes back. He still is one. He tries to make her his ward. He wants to send her to school to make her a proper lady. Meanwhile, in the world right now, there's a vote going on to allow women more rights. And that's kind of ties into why their mother has gone missing. It also ties into another case that Sherlock is aware of a missing boy who is wanted by his family. They want to find him. And Enola decides that she is going to go find her mother. So she leaves, and then she ends up running into this young man who's on the run, and they kind of start on this adventure.
I got to jump in real quick right here. Doesn't it just seem fitting that Eleven's mother turned out to be Bellatrix Lestrange and possibly Voldemort is her father? Explains where the powers come from, untrained wizard. It all fits together.
The bald look in the first movie, the bald look in the first series.
Yes,
Very Voldemort-like.
Mm-hmm.
No, yes, definitely.
Not to completely derail the conversation, but hey, that's kind of what I do in these things.
Exactly. So she sets out on to find her mother, as we said. And she gets into all, as you can imagine in this type of movie, she gets into all hijinks. She decides to help the boy out because she doesn't want to help him, but then she goes back to the room and she sees this guy trying to murder him. So that's not just someone trying to find him, someone's trying to kill him. So she steps in, she saves the kid's life, and then they get off the train and try to go their separate ways. But of course, as these things happen, they keep meeting back up with each other. She decides that she wants to help him. I think what we get here is a great star vehicle for Millie Bobby Brown, who is, Netflix royalty at this point with 3 seasons of Stranger Things and the 4th one on the way. And yes. I think it's a really fun movie. It has lots of good action sequences. It shows off like her her stunt skills. I think they taught her a lot of good moves and stuff for this movie. Henry Cavill is a lot of fun as Sherlock Holmes. He kind of grows through some growing pains of always being on his own, but having to realize that he needs to be there for his family type of thing too, which I thought was interesting. Mycroft's a dick, as we talked about, so he doesn't go through any growing pains. He's still kind of a jerk. I think a little bit at the end, they humanize him a little bit, where it's like he's not a complete piece of crap.
But yeah, Millie Bobby Brown is really just the star. She steals every scene that she's in.
Yes.
This movie really got to show her dynamic range. And I mean, we've already seen that she's an incredible actor. But just, the depressed sadness to the just quippy one-liner humor to the back and forth action. She's incredibly talented. And
yes.
I know, like I said, we know this already, but this just is the next step in her career.
Yes, it's a great showcase for her. I think right now, as of yesterday, it was number 1 on Netflix. So if the popularity continues, I think we have probably a franchise on our hands with this one.
Yes. I knew this was going to be a hit because Miranda, my wife, actually sat down, watched this movie, and said this was a great film. And my wife does not like movies at all. She just will not sit through them. So that's telling.
As someone who knows Miranda, that's big. That's big that because I know that she just doesn't like watching a lot of movies and stuff like we do. So if you can catch a movie like this, there's a good selling point for it. It caught someone who's really not into movies. It made them sit down and watch it and really like it. And I think my dad enjoyed it too. And he likes his movies usually that are a little more fast paced and a little more explosions. And he sat through the whole thing with me. Enjoyed it. We both laughed. It was a good movie. It's a solid. You could call it a family movie. It's PG-13, so there's a little violence and stuff, but there isn't a lot of heavy language or anything. It's fun for the whole family. She's really great in it, as we said, and the fourth wall breaking, I think, is a cute little just gimmick that they use for this movie. Like you said, it reminds you of a Ferris Bueller. She kind of has that same kind of punky attitude. And it works. That's the main thing about this movie is it works, and it works really well. And Netflix has been kind of on a roll of late, and it's good because no movies are going to theaters really, or the ones that are, no one's going to theaters still. So to have Netflix and Amazon and some of these other people pick up some of these movies or release these movies that maybe they were going to wait on in the middle of this pandemic has been good, and it's given us a lot of quality entertainment. And this is just another check mark for Netflix, another successful film.
Yeah. Now I'm looking at the reviews and like Metacritic and IMDb ratings. They're not as high as I'd like them to be, or I feel that they should be. But I think a lot of people went into this movie feeling like, oh, it's going to be a Sherlock type continuum.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
It's not the case at all. I mean, it couldn't be, in my opinion, further from.
No, it's definitely not like Sherlock Holmes. It's not like It's not like the Benedict TV show. It's not like the Robert Downey Jr. movies that we got, which I enjoy, all of that. But this is something different. And I think if you go in, I'll just say Rotten Tomatoes, 92% from critics, which average of 7.14 out of 10, which is really good. Yes. That tells you that most critics are really digging this movie. If you see a positive rating where it's like 6 of 10, that means they just think it's okay. 7 or higher is usually a good indication that they mostly like this movie. Metacritic is a little more harsher on their ratings, which is why it's a little lower. And IMDb, right. I mean, I hate to say it, but sometimes when there's a movie starring a female character, people go on and they rate it lower just because. It's sad that we live in those times. I'm not going to honestly say that that's why this movie is maybe a little rated lower on IMDb, but I've seen it and you've seen it. We've all kind of seen it in this, day and age where movies get, rated really low. Just based on who's in it or what their message is. Because it is a very much a powerful woman movie. And that's something that I think is needed in society today. But taking that away, it's just a fun movie overall. Yes, it has a message for young girls, which is great. But as a 37-year-old man, I just enjoyed watching this movie. It was very entertaining. A lot of fun. And it's over 2 hours, but it kind of flies by. You really don't feel it, which it's sad, but as you get older and you kind of want to watch as much content as possible, when you see a movie's over 2 hours, you're like, oh, God. Like, this better be worth it because I could watch one movie and start another movie within that for time frame or watch 2 episodes of a good TV show. So,
yep.
But it was very captivating, a lot of fun, and I definitely recommend checking it out. Our guest had to leave. Originally, I'd planned Wes Craven so Scott and I could talk more horror films. But Wayne, you're going to have to sit here and talk horror films with me. So, gone but not forgotten. Every week we talk about a celebrity who has passed, who we miss. And we're getting into October, which for me is horror movie month. And I want to talk about Wes Craven because there's a lot of movies that he did that I think people don't talk about as much. Before we talk about him, though, we'll recognize we lost Michael Lonsdale, who was a Bond villain in Moonraker. Ron Cobb, a legendary cartoonist turned set designer, worked on Alien, Back to the Future, and Conan the Barbarian, died at 83. Michael Chapman, cinematographer of Taxi Driver, Raging Bull, The Fugitive, passed away. Last week, we talked about Gale Sayers, and unfortunately, he passed away this week at the age of 77. He had been sick. It's really, as Bears fans, it's bad news. He's a good dude.
Yeah.
Kind of ironic, I guess, that we talked about him. And
and we were talking about Brian's song. The football
exactly.
Song,
we talked about Brian's song.
And it just, and thinking and listening and reading up on Gale Sayers, and, Brian Piccolo died 50 years ago this year. And then just to think that, we did this whole thing about their relationship and, for Gail to pass on, it's just almost like,
It hits harder, I think.
One of those things that's like, wow, okay.
We also lost someone who I was a huge fan of as a kid, and that is one of the Road Warriors, the last half of the Road Warriors, Animal.
Absolutely,
named
Joe Laurinaitis.
Joe Laurinaitis, father of Ram star James Laurinaitis. He passed away this week. He was still relatively young, so I'm not sure exactly what the cause of death was. So that sucked. And then we lost Arthur Wooster, who was a cinematographer and a director. He was 91. Rest in peace to all those people that passed on. It's been a kind of a long, rough week for Hollywood deaths, and we're going to move on into Wes Craven. So we talked about Wes Craven and Nightmare on Elm Street, and he came back and he wrote the third one, and he did New Nightmare. Wes Craven was directing movies since the early 70s when he did Last House on the Left, which is a movie I actually just started watching for the first time yesterday. It's infamous because of a overly long sexual assault scene that didn't need to be as long as it was, most people felt. And I just, like I said, I've seen the remake, but I started watching the original because we were going to talk about Wes today. I get why it's a little frustrating for people to watch. Like, I think I was like 45 minutes in, and they hadn't even gotten to the revenge killing part yet. So that's what that movie's about, is this girl gets killed, and then her family, like, murders the murderers. So, you get a little bit of revenge. So it's a very rough movie. Wes got his start in adult films. He was, I believe, an editor. And he actually, after his death, it was discovered that he actually did direct one. And I think they pinpointed down which one that he directed. So when he originally, the interesting backstory to Last House on the Left was when he originally wrote it, he actually wrote it to be an adult film. And it actually was a well-written script, a lot of people thought, that read it. So they convinced him, they're like, dude, like, no, make this an actual movie, remove those parts, make it a horror film, like a revenge thriller. And that's what he did. And thus started the career of Wes Craven. You mentioned, we were talking off camera here, Hills Have Eyes. Hills Have Eyes was an original idea by him, and he created this really, his early movies were really grimy, really like gross looking, and Hills Have Eyes definitely holds up to that. Takes place in the desert, very creepy. But
yeah,
really,
the colony or family, like, they're affected by nuclear fallout or radiation, right?
Yes. And that holds true in the remake as well from Alexandra Aja. And these people
I have a pretty good story about the remake of Hills Have Eyes, if I could for a second here.
Sure, go ahead.
I agreed to go see that on a first date. It was going very well. We met for coffee. She's like, so you want to, go do something else? I'm like, yeah, sure. What do you want to do? She's like, you like movies? Yeah, I love movies. Well, I am dying to see The Hills Have Eyes. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's cool. And in my head, I'm like, son of a, no. And I was a complete coward and, like, kind of had a panic attack and freaked out. And needless to say, there wasn't a second date involved. But anyway.
Made you question her a little bit, huh?
Well, if you're familiar with The Big Bang Theory, the character of Rajesh,
yes,
has a relationship with a woman named Emily who is big into horror, and
I remember. Yep.
Cemetery to do things. So that's kind of anyway.
Yeah. No, I get it. Yeah. Us horror people are a bit strange sometimes.
But one of the things I wanted to ask with the remakes of The Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes, did Wes Craven have anything to do with these, or did he have to just give his blessing? Do you think, or was it a studio?
I believe he was. Let me see. I think he was still a producer on them. It's not on. It doesn't say it on his. Oh, here we go. Producer only. Yes, he was a producer on Last House on the Left and The Hills Have Eyes. Not The Hills Have Eyes Part 2, though, the remake of the sequel of Hills Have Eyes. He produced a bunch of other horror films, too. He produced like a bunch of Dracula movies in the early to mid-2000s, too, which were pretty awful. But, so yeah, he did produce them. How much he actually had to do with it on set, I don't know. But I believe Alexander Aja did have his, his blessing to make Hills Have Eyes. Mm-hmm. And... it just, So let's go. We'll go back to Wes a little bit here early on. Sure. So he also did too, and I'm kind of trying to. I've seen a bunch of his movies, but I'm in the process of trying to watch some of his older ones. So these two, like Deadly Blessing, I haven't seen. I will watch that soon. Swamp Thing, I have seen. I don't know, Wayne, if you're familiar with that one. It's kind of like a B superhero movie. It was fun back in the day. They made a sequel that was awful. Wes had nothing to do with that one, but. Yeah, it was kind of him branching out into more big budget fare back in the day, as big budget as you can get in the 80s. It was somewhat successful for him. I think it was a little bit of a disappointment, but maybe successful for him because at that point, Hills Have Eyes and Deadly Blessing and Last House on the Left weren't like huge box office hits. Last House on the Left and Hills Have Eyes were like grindhouse movies. But here, so 1984, we get Nightmare on Elm Street, and that's why I think a lot of people miss the man, because he was kind of revolutionary in the horror world. And while he did step out occasionally and do other things, Nightmare on Elm Street really set him apart from all the other slasher directors. It put him on the level with John Carpenter and Tobe Hooper, who did Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it made people respect the name. And anytime you saw a Wes Craven movie after Nightmare on Elm Street, you were excited. Serpent in the Rainbow. This is a good New Orleans set thriller about a man who gets involved in the voodoo world, and it's pretty crazy. It's a crazy movie. I really dug it. 89, though, we get to one of my favorite ones. Actually, back-to-back here, we have two of my favorite ones. We have Shocker, starring a young Peter Berg, who went on to be a big-time film director, and Mitch Pileggi, who was on X-Files and Sons of Anarchy, He plays a man who gets executed, and he ends up going into the electricity. And he wants to continue, similar to something like Frighteners, he wants to continue killing people even though he's dead. He wants his death toll to go up. And it's just a really creative movie. I saw it probably back in the mid-90s on TV or whatever. And I love this movie. There was just nothing bad I could say about this movie. It was a lot of fun, and it just showed that he still had it, that he was still Wes Craven, and he was still being creative. And it was just a really good movie. And then after that, he did another one, a very socially relevant movie, even to this day, The People Under the Stairs. I don't know if you've seen that one, Wayne. It's about...
I have.
You have? Okay. I love this.
Long time ago.
I love this movie. I have seen it probably a dozen times, if not more, and... it revolves around a kid who, with the help of Veen Rhames' character, try to go in and steal all this money from these rich, old, or not really old, but rich white landlords that are, not dissimilar than Donald Trump, who tried to kick out black people and other minorities out of housing in the 80s and early 90s to make more money. That's basically what this movie's about. These people... Huh? Slumlords, yes. And these people are sadistic. They have people they keep in their basement. They have a girl who they say is their daughter, but they're actually brother and sister, so they don't have any kids. They kind of ups the creep factor in this one. And the two actors who play the creepy brother and sister are fantastic. And it's really, if you haven't seen that movie, it's fantastic. It's one of my favorites of Wes. He did New Nightmare. He did Vampire in Brooklyn, which is another one I like. So New Nightmare looks like was the last thing that he actually wrote and directed. After that, he teamed up with probably one of his best people he could team up, and that was Kevin Williamson, and they made Scream. And Scream, we talked about that in our very first episode, is one of my favorite movies of all time. Probably one of the movies that made me like horror so much. And that's why I owe a lot to Wes Craven in my horror appetite, if you will. Because Scream really did it for me. It's a fantastic movie. It has a lot of his trademark stuff in it. Definitely, there's a nod to Freddy Krueger when they're pointing at the janitor, and it's actually Wes in a fedora hat with the striped Freddy Krueger shirt, which is pretty funny. It just, that movie we talked about. I'm not going to go on and on about Scream, which we probably will do a thing about it at some point.
They're making Scream 5, aren't they?
They are making Scream 5, which will be the first one without Wes. So we'll see. I like the guys that are doing it, so it'll be interesting to see how that one turns out. But then he made Scream 2, which was, to me, again, fantastic. But then he stepped out and he did a movie called Music of the Heart. And that's when I talk about, like, he likes to leave the genre every once in a while. And that was I believe, a true story movie about a teacher starring Meryl Streep, which is just, like, one of those, like, oddest things. Like, I'm looking at the poster. It does not say from the director of Nightmare on Elm Street. So that's a missed selling point, I think, there with Music of the Heart. So then he went on and he made Scream 3, Cursed, Red Eye. I never did see Cursed because I heard it was pretty awful. Well, he is actually credited as a writer and producer on The Hills Have Eyes 2, the sequel to the remake. So it looks like he did have something to do with that one.
Well, I didn't know that he originally wrote a sequel to The Hills Have Eyes.
He did. Okay, so I glossed over that one because I haven't seen it yet. But the reason I haven't seen it was because apparently they wanted a sequel. He didn't want to make one. So he directed it, but they basically like took a lot of footage from the original and like just reused it. And then shot some new scenes, and then that's how they got Hills Have Eyes Part 2. So it was like this Frankenstein monster of a movie. I'm going to watch it eventually, because like I said, I'm trying to watch all his movies. And it didn't, from what I understand, it didn't work. One of his two last movies were My Soul to Take and Scream 4. I love Scream 4. My Soul to Take, I actually really like, and it was shit on by everybody. I thought it was a really good movie. It's like a teenage ghost slasher movie, so similar to something like Nightmare on Elm Street. And I thought he did a really good job with it. It missed a lot of marks, I think, with critics and fans. I really dug it, and I think that's a movie that people should rediscover. It's 10 years old now. So yeah, to me, when we do these things, we always like to talk about what the person meant to me. Like I said, I know, Wayne, like you don't really know horror movies that much, and so Wes Craven may not have been that when he passed in 2015. You knew who he was, but to me, It was big. He was like the first big horror film director from my generation to pass away. So when you lose somebody like that, it's difficult as a horror fan because you realize that you're never going to kind of get to see him make like a comeback, and it becomes sad. You start thinking about it. He died in 2015. It was 4 years after Scream 4. He hadn't made a movie since then. So obviously maybe he was sick within that time and he just couldn't get something going and couldn't work anymore, which I completely understand. He was old. He was 76. Since then, we've lost George Romero, we've lost Tobe Hooper, and we lost Stuart Gordon. Losing Wes first, I think, just hurt a lot more. And George, you could tell, the last couple times you saw George, that he was sick. With Wes, you just hadn't seen him in a couple years. It's kind of like that one thing with like Alan Rickman. When you don't really see a person and then all of a sudden they're just gone because they had this sickness for like 4 years and you're like, holy crap. Or Harold Ramis, who we already talked about, same thing. Mm-hmm. No one really saw him in like 4 or 5 years and then he was gone. So it was an impact for me as a horror fan. I think a lot of horror fans around the world felt it. I know a lot of the directors that I listen to, like on podcasts and stuff, they still talk about him to this day because they would go to all these horror director lunches and stuff and he was always there and he was always willing to help. From what I understand from listening to a lot of these guys, he was really good to them behind the scenes, wanted to help them be the better directors that they could be. So yeah, it's just a huge loss for the horror community and for Hollywood overall, I think. But we will move on since, again, this is more for me than Wayne. So we're on to what we've seen this week, or what we've watched, which for me, I'll tell you right now, because I started working, Wayne, it's a little light.
Hey, but it's a major victory.
Right, exactly.
Well, I will go first then.
Okay, go ahead.
I caught up on The Boys on Netflix or on Amazon. Season 2 is shaping up to be just as gritty and just as shocking as Season 1. I'm not going to go into that because it is brand new, but, it's everything that Season 1 was, and it's getting really, really good. I am watching Unsolved Mysteries, the original Robert Stack version from the 80s.
Nice.
I'm currently on Season 4, and just that, as much of a coward as I am about horror movies, I love the theme song to Unsolved Mysteries, that dun 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 dun. That gave children nightmares in the 80s. I'm like, it kind of makes me feel, yeah, because I used to watch that with my aunt, who has been gone for about 4 years now. So it's kind of like more of a reminiscing type thing. But I digress. I watched Casino Royale, Daniel Craig's first foray into James Bond. It's a classic. It's a favorite of mine because it's got a lot of Texas Hold'em in there. I'm also watching the American Barbecue Showdown on Netflix. As a guy who loves to cook barbecue, this is a really fun show. It's a competition. It feels like Barbecue Pitmasters from about 10 years ago. It's just, the whole barbecue community and how they come together and their competitions, but also it's not so cutthroat. It's nice because competitors are there for each other, and it's like a family type atmosphere because they are cheering each other on, but they do want to win.
Yeah.
And a lot of cool techniques you see about cooking barbecue, and hey, very cool. Let's see. Watched The Knockaround Guys this week.
Good movie.
We talked about that one before. To get Miranda to watch Enola Holmes, we started watching Sherlock again. Let's see. I think that's about it. We're still watching Big Bang Theory before bed, just as a wind down. And yeah, that's about it this week. I watched the first episode of Cursed. I'm actually not even through the first episode, the retelling of the King Arthur and the Sword and the Stone and whatnot.
Okay.
It's good. I just don't know why I haven't gotten back to it yet. So just work and life and stuff, but I'm definitely looking forward to picking that back up next week.
All right, so I watched one on Shudder called Spiral, and it was pretty good. It's about two gay men who have one of them has a daughter, and they move to like this new town, and weird things start to happen. Start seeing people outside their house, and the one that doesn't have the kid, he starts getting suspicious of the town. He thinks that maybe something's going on, that maybe they want to, they're after them because they're gay. So, hatred, that kind of way, which is obviously still around and still very relevant to today. So it kind of fits in. It's a newer movie. It's on Shudder. It's really good. It's kind of cultish a little bit. I really actually like the way it turned out. I thought it was a really good movie. It was really well done. If you have Shudder, definitely check it out. Yesterday, I watched again the new Terminator movie, Dark Fate, with my parents because they hadn't seen it yet. I really like this movie a lot. Mackenzie Davis is a great addition to the Terminator franchise. If you haven't seen it, if you've been kind of holding off because the last couple weren't good, I definitely recommend checking it out. It's great to have Linda and Arnold back, even though they may not be as good as they were back then. It's still fun to see them, and the rest of the cast, the new cast, is really good, and I definitely recommend checking it out. Sudden Death, rewatched part of that with my dad yesterday. I put it on, and he ended up finishing it. Jean-Claude Van Damme. The movie takes place during a hockey game where the Blackhawks are playing the Pittsburgh Penguins.
And we don't talk about that because the Blackhawks lost.
But it's a fun 90s movie. It's a kind of a look back into what it was back then. There is a sequel coming out with Michael J. White called Welcome to Sudden Death. It'll probably be on Netflix next week because I think it's produced by Netflix and Universal. Yeah, so look out for that. But if you can watch Sudden Death, the original, I think it's a fun movie. Maybe not Van Damme's best, but it's a fun movie. I've still been watching the Nurse Ratched series called Ratched. I haven't finished it yet. Again, like I said, I've been back to work, and my hours are early in the morning. So by the time I get home, my parents are still in town too. We're not really watching a lot of stuff that we want to watch. So I'm still in the middle of Supernatural. Still trying to catch up on The Boys. I've only watched the first episode so far, so I will get to that soon. That is basically where I'm at, because like I said, I haven't really had a lot of time to watch a lot of things. On to the recommendations. What I am going to recommend this week, because we were talking horror movies, we're going into October. This episode will debut. This episode will premiere in October. If you have HBO Max, they have a really good horror lineup. They have all the Alien films: Alien, Alien 3, Alien Resurrection, but Aliens, An American Werewolf in London, Annabelle Comes Home, Blade 1, 2, and 3, the original Blob, Brood.
Cookie Coo. Sorry, my favorite line from any Blade movie.
That's from Blade 3. They have Child's Play 1 and 2, Conjuring 2, Death Becomes Her, great dark horror comedy that I really like. Deep Blue Sea, killer shark movie. The Devil, which is a really cool movie. Doctor Sleep, one of my favorite movies of last year. Definitely recommend checking that out. The Exorcist. All you really need for October is HBO Max.
Did you say, let's go back to Devil. Did you say The Devil? Devil, the one about the elevator?
Yes, that one. I think it's just Devil, right? Isn't that Devil?
I'm not sure, because I'm sure there's a couple. I'm sure there's a movie called The Devil too.
Yes,
so.
This one is called Devil. It's produced by M. Night Shyamalan, directed by somebody else, but he's a producer on it. Really cool movie. Definitely recommend checking that one out. If you want to be creeped out, watch Eraserhead. Really weird. Frighteners, From Dusk Till Dawn. Those are two of my favorite 90s horror films. Gremlins 2. The Hitcher. Let's see, what else we got here? Interview with the Vampire. The Invisible Man just debuted. It Chapter 2. Jaws. The whole Jaws franchise. So just go over the whole Leprechaun franchise if you're into cheesy horror films like I am. Go over to HBO Max if you don't have it and you want to watch some horror films. If you do have it, then you're missing out, because there's some good stuff on there to check out. I'm going to get to news and notes, unless, Wayne, you have any recommendations or no?
No, but yeah, I'm just really excited as we roll into October.
Yes.
I'm not the biggest horror movie fan, but I do love Halloween, the holiday. As you know, I am fine with the Halloween franchise.
Yes.
We have seen a few of those movies together because, I'll tough it out. Back.
Slasher movies are fun. There's the director of Hatchet, Adam Green. That's why he made his slasher films funny, because in his mind, watching those people, and people are going to be like, wow, you're demented. Watching people get chopped up in a ridiculous, over-the-top way can be fun. And that's how I look at those movies. That's how I look at the new Child's Play remake. I was in the theater laughing my butt off when some of that stuff was happening. People probably think I'm weird, but I think I even heard people go, why are people laughing? I'm like, you're in the wrong movie, kid. Get out. All right, so news this week, we got quite a bit. Peacemaker, which is a character in the new Suicide Squad movie, is going to have his own HBO Max TV show. Starring John Cena, created...
John Cena! Da, 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 da.
Starring, as Wayne just announced there, John Cena. Directed and created by James Gunn, who's directing the movie, obviously, so that'll be good, I think. It'll be fun to see how that turns out. Disney moves all their Marvel movies back, plus a bunch of their Disney and 20th Century Fox movies that they have coming out. Black Widow is now coming out May of next year, so that pushes everything back. Shang-Chi, I think, is the middle of next year, like July, and then Eternals is back to November again, but a year later. So that's kind of crazy, but maybe that's for the best, because people are still not going to movie theaters. Everyone thought Tenet was going to bring everybody back. It hasn't. People are still being cautious, so that's why everyone's pushing everything back again. Let's see. Nick Fury is going to have his own Disney Plus series. The Boys is getting a spin-off about college-age superheroes, so that should be interesting. And Aldous Hodge was cast as Hawkman in the Black Adam movie starring The Rock. I like that casting. Aldous Hodge is a good actor. He's been around for quite some time. All right, movies and TV shows coming out. Monsterland hits Hulu October 2nd. Sound of Metal, December 4th on Amazon. It's about a drummer who loses his hearing, starring Riz Ahmed. Looks really good. Cadaver hits Netflix October 22nd. Truth Seekers, starring Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, is out in time for Halloween on Amazon Prime. It's an original series, and it comes out October 30th. So people should definitely check that one out. Those guys are hilarious. Thank you to Scott Jordan for being our first guest this week. It was fantastic. And
absolutely.
We hope to have more guests. We'll definitely bring him back on as well. And
yes.
Thanks again for listening, everybody. It's been fun doing this, 14 weeks. Wayne and I enjoy doing this. We hope everyone's enjoying the content. And we look forward to keep doing it, definitely through the month of October.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.